Hello, and welcome to the Overcoming Podcast with your host, Adriana Lewin. Before we jump into today's episode, if you could please kindly subscribe to this podcast, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram at _Adriana_Lewin. Hello, and welcome to today's podcast episode on the Overcoming Podcast. I'm excited to introduce our new guest, Josh Kellar. Thank you so much, Josh Kellar, for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
I wanted to bring you on because, being a therapist, connecting with other therapists and learning from other therapists is kind of my passion here. One of my besties, she is also her name is, or she's a doctor in the field. I'll give her a shout out, Dr. Candace Chuyu Campbell. And she says, I just have a very curious mind. And so this is why I do what I do, because I'm just so curious. So I learned that you are a licensed marriage and family therapist, also a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas. So I'd love for you to kind of talk about what you specialize in. We'll just start that way.
Okay. Yeah. So over the last couple of years, I've really started to develop my practice towards couples. Most of the couples that come to me are, I guess you'd call them high conflict couples. I treat a lot of infidelity. Probably about 60% of the couples that I work with, there's some form of cheating or betrayal that they're dealing with. And then, naturally with high conflict couples, you do find a lot of trauma that they're either aware of or they're becoming aware of because it's creating so much difficulty in the relationship. So I do some individual counseling as well, but it's primarily working with couples. So.
Okay. Can you define and just further clarify what is a high conflict couple?
Yeah, so I would say high conflict couples are ones where, despite their desire to work through things, whenever they try to have conversations, they get flooded, completely overwhelmed, things get carried away. And, really from the start of their conversations, things are just already intense. They don't necessarily have to go 0 to 10 in 30 seconds, but most of the time it doesn't take very long for them to get to a point where there's just nothing getting accomplished, and that's kind of the state of the relationship. Most of the time it's they're stuck in this negative sentiment chronically, and they just don't feel positive about the relationship for a majority of the time that they're together.
Tell me more. So for these couples, like, how do you, when they come to your office, walk me through that process. Like, are they ready to leave the relationship, or are they just like, okay, this is the last ditch effort for us? And how do you walk them through and navigate that high conflict into some more, what's the word I'm looking for?
Working.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. So, it really, really varies. I do have some couples that come in and one partner is completely ambivalent about the relationship. One partner really wants it to work, and the other is just unsure if they even want to be in the relationship. And so naturally in those situations, we can't do traditional couples therapy because both partners have to be invested in the relationship. So there may be some high conflict there where one partner is already, planning or thinking about how to leave, but they do want to have that last ditch effort to make things work. And so the approach there is really trying to get them to feel like they're in a place where they could hope that things would be better. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that has to do with seeing some immediate changes, helping both of them to identify what's going to help you feel great about, what's next, not thinking about perfecting the relationship, but just right now, what's going to help you feel better about hoping that things can move in the right direction. It's kind of a very, very small step. But then there's the couples that come in that they both want to work on things. They want the relationship to succeed, but they just don't know how. And so a lot of times when they come in, during the initial intake interview, I'm getting a relationship history, but I'm also looking at how they handle conflict. And it doesn't take long for them to start, their typical fights. And I'll just kind of let them fight for a little bit because it's good to see that. And I'll ask, is this how things typically go? And so, what I'm trying to get a feel for is, are they going to be too flooded to have, a productive conversation? And if they are, we have to start with some self-regulating, how do we do some physiologically self-soothing techniques, so that they can actually sit and have a conversation that's going to be productive. So a lot of that's just right on the front end. How do we calm down?
So you talk about ambivalence. Can you kind of dissect that even further for people who have never heard the term ambivalence?
Okay. So, most couples don't start the relationship with one person planning someday to not want to be in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, what develops is either some contempt towards the other person, or they've just been so hurt that they don't feel like they can stay in the relationship, or they're recognizing some toxicity that makes it really difficult to be in there. And so usually before they've come to the point of coming to counseling, they've already made some decisions about the future of the relationship, and they may have decided that they're done. What I've found is that when someone says I'm done, that doesn't necessarily mean they're done with the relationship. They're just done dealing with things as they have been. And so that ambivalence is they're kind of on the fence. They don't know whether they want the relationship to continue, usually because they don't have a lot of hope that things can get better.
Mm-hmm.
But they also don't necessarily want to leave the relationship because they do recognize there's a lot of costs to that.
Mm-hmm.
If they have kids, for example, there's going to be an impact on them. There's a financial cost. There's a lot of things like that a lot of time those are the things that keep them in the relationship, even though they may not want to be in the relationship. So they're ambivalent. They're not sure if they want it to work or not. And so that's kind of where that shows up, and moving them out of that ambivalence takes some planning, with all three parties involved.
Who are the all three parties involved?
Yeah, each partner and me as a therapist.
There you go. I'm like, wait, because we've talked about the infidelity here, and I jumped into that.
Can't have that third party involved if the relationship's going to work. That's a no-go. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
So you're dealing with people who come in, and you actually said something that really resonated because I actually have someone in my sphere of influence per se, right? That they also told their spouse, like in the middle of an argument, they're just like, we're done, right? They put their hand up, we're done.
We're done. Yeah.
And one party member was like, that's it. They're kicking me out. They're over. The relationship is over. Pack the bags, left. Right. While what that person actually meant was, I'm just done arguing. Like the conversation is over.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The way that we walk away from these encounters, believing that something was meant that wasn't, that's part of the problem. That's a symptom of the poor conflict resolution, is that we're not communicating clearly what we intend to communicate. And so it just gets misunderstood, and then of course reactions and conclusions are drawn that don't help the situation at all.
So what have you found to be some of the most useful approaches, techniques for couples that are struggling with this in order to make that conflict a little more, I can't think of the word for some reason, I keep getting stuck, like more, I don't know, I can't think. My brain is like fried.
So bringing some clarity to the confusion is one of the big goals. And so, I'm trained in the Gottman method of couples therapy. And so, there's several techniques that we use there to guide couples through a process of communicating very, very clearly. The Gottman-Rappaport technique, for example, a lot of people are familiar with it, even if they don't know that that's what it's called. It's just the speaker-listener or share, check, share, where one person starts and the other person says, okay, this is what I hear you saying, and they offer a little summary, and then the other person has a chance to clarify. It really kind of slows that progression down when we get into these conflicts, because we're going into this, hyper state of physiological arousal where our
Mm-hmm.
is just firing, going into fight or flight, we start to draw conclusions that may not be accurate. And so slowing these conversations down to where we're really understanding what the other person's saying, we're being really clear in our communication. That's kind of communication basics 101 for couples. But from there, that kind of sets a method for some of the other interventions. After a conflict, there's one where we walk the couples through, how did you feel? What was your subjective reality? Like how did you experience this? What did you notice happening? And
Mm-hmm.
then, the real magic in that intervention has to do with understanding the triggers that you brought to that conflict that made it feel so intense. It wasn't just that you spent too much money. It's that when you spent too much money, it took me back to my childhood when, we didn't have.
Yeah.
So that trigger gets brought in from the past and kind of heightens the intensity of those conflicts. And most couples are just unaware that all of that's, playing out behind the scenes. And so, walking them through methodically, let's ask these questions and get to the bottom of why this actually was so difficult for you.
I love that because so I am EMDR trained, working towards, certification. And I've been reading, so I've also been doing Gottman training. That was like something that I had on my to-do list. And just doing that in conjunction with EMDR has been so like, it gets your wheels turning because for me, I just had a conversation with another marriage consultant, and basically I've realized, because I don't really work a lot with marriage, but as
Sure.
I see, couples, and in my own personal situation, realizing my triggers, the things that really piss me off and just get under my nails, right? Like under my
Mhm.
skin, my nails, whatever, with my spouse, tend to be triggers unrelated to him. So I really want to say my problems, or the problem in our marriage, isn't necessarily just my spouse's fault. It's like, oh, hold on, let me take a look at like my own baggage I'm bringing in here and figure out like,
Yeah.
why is that really making me upset? Like the whole, and it doesn't have to be like my parents were this way or that way. It can be so many different experiences. So, um, I love that you bring that up because I'm like, oh yeah, that like makes sense to me that
Sure.
the problem, like you're trying to say, I guess, or what I'm gathering from you is the problem isn't always about the actual problem. It's about the past, like those
Yeah.
traumatic experiences. And I put
Yeah.
air quotes for those of you who can't see me.
Yeah. Yeah, the traumatic experiences, and not all trauma is created equal, but all trauma affects us, in different ways. And so, we might, if triggers is, that's kind of a buzzword right now, right?
Hmm.
And so, this whole idea of you're triggering me and like shedding the responsibility of my trauma onto someone else for triggering me, that's one of the things that we try to move away from in couples therapy. Instead of you're triggering me, saying I'm feeling triggered, because it makes us responsible for our own responses to our trauma.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's really hard to do that when you'd rather just blame the other person for what they've done that's triggered you. So
Yes. The emotions get so high, right? Like the
yeah,
defensiveness kicks in and
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And most of the time our partners are wanting to connect with us, but because of our trauma and being triggered, our defenses show up. And I mean, it's impossible to connect with someone's defenses.
hmm.
There's no connection that happens there. It's like you've built a wall up or you've gone into attack mode.
Hmm.
And that's what makes high conflict couples so difficult and feel so stuck, is that they really desire connection, but the trauma gets in the way of that connection as, like a brick wall, or even, kind of an offensive attack against the other person, which is really about self protection.
Yeah, for sure. Do you incorporate internal family systems in your
Um,
model?
Not typically. I was trained a little bit in IFS back in 2005 or 6 when I was in grad school. I really
Mhm.
liked it, just the parts. And so I use parts language without directly being an IFS counselor. And so
Okay.
there's a part of me that wants this, but then there's a part of me that wants this. I don't label them the same way that IFS does them.
Yeah. And like there's a part of me that shows up when this experience hurts that part of me, right? Instead of, and it's, I don't know. I find I do enjoy IFS. I haven't really fully trained in it, but I definitely see how it can help people separate the experience as a whole to like a part. Like that part of you is really offended, right? Or that
Yeah,
part is really hurt.
sure. Sure. Well, I think that moves us away from this, all or nothing approach, right? I'm not all triggered, right? There's a part of me that is, still, desiring
Hmm.
good things, whereas this other part of me, that's the offended part. We can compartmentalize that, and then it doesn't become so all provoking and all consuming. Um, yeah, which I think that just helps to not to minimize the hurt, but to just kind of disentangle it from everything else in some ways.
Yeah. So you also do some work with people who have had, what do you call, cheating and betrayal, affairs, infidelity. Um,
Yes. Yes.
sorry, it makes me laugh a little bit because when I hear the word infidelity, I have a positive association with that
Okay.
because of my so during my husband's gonna kill me.
I know.
But um we were doing our marriage vows, what's the thing called, like the practice run,
Oh yeah, like the rehearsal dinner
the
or something.
rehearsal dinner, the rehearsal, there you go. I'm like, I'm drawing a blank here for some reason today, but we had a rehearsal and the priest is like, do this, say that, repeat after me. And my lovely husband tripped up in just in his practice vows, and he was like, through love and infidelity, and we
Oh
just
no,
all started cracking up. And he's like, I mean fidelity, fidelity.
fidelity.
My husband is the most loyal person
Yeah,
ever. Like
yeah,
he is just the best person.
sure.
But it's just so funny that I when I hear the word infidelity, it just often takes me back to that experience, and it makes me chuckle a little bit.
That's fine.
But this is not a laughing matter.
That's
Infidelity
fine.
is not a laughing
Not,
matter.
not at all.
Um, so why don't you talk a little bit about the high or the infidelity clients that you work with, and what you see coming in and how you help couples going through that?
Yeah. So, obviously there's a lot of hurt that comes into play. The betrayal trauma, it's not unique to infidelity. There's lots of different ways that people can feel that betrayal. So sometimes it has to do with like finances, like somebody discovers a gambling addiction, or that they've not been paying the rent for 6 months. There's a betrayal there, and so that that actually shows up as trauma. There's a trauma response that's associated with that. And so, being a Gottman trained therapist, they've got a method. They're the 3 A's of dealing with infidelity is a atone, attune, and attach, which is just a sequence that you have to move the couples through in order to find healing. Atonement is really about, kind of acknowledging the wrong that was done and
Mhm.
allowing your partner to really ask the questions that need to be asked and kind of understand exactly what happened. That atonement has to include, at some point, some expression of remorse over what occurred, or the betrayed partner is not going to be able to move through that if they don't feel like um, their partner really feels, bad about what they did. Um, Attunement is when we move into kind of how it happened or why it happened. And so there's a lot of curiosity and exploration of, what was going on in the relationship
Mhm.
that may have contributed to this occurring. We certainly don't want to ever blame the betrayed partner for the infidelity. But I think it's fair to acknowledge that there's a lot of times contributing factors that lead people into to doing these things. And so attunement is really about just getting curious with the other person to really understand, where were you, in your mindset, where were you emotionally that took you there. And sometimes there's some accepting of responsibility that happens, on the part of the betrayed partner,
Mm-hmm.
that stage as well. And then the attach phase is really where we try to restore the connection in the relationship. We start doing things to help the couple feel like, there's hope again, that they can have, a healthy 2.0 version of the relationship. And, a lot of times, especially if there was like betrayal, like sexual, infidelity,
Mm-hmm.
that's a huge component of restoring that connection, is how do we reattach in this way, when there's been some physical cheating. So that's the basic process of leading a couple through that. Obviously, it doesn't happen quite so fluid and smooth. It gets pretty sticky sometimes, but yeah, that's what it looks like.
So I want to go back to a tone.
Sure.
There are so many couples, and I've heard this often, you know, that basically the one who feels betrayed feels the need to continually question and question and question. And to some extent, some people say they have a right to question until they feel like all their questions have been answered. But at what point
Yeah,
is it like, okay, we've asked the questions, by continuing to ask the questions, maybe it's a disservice to the relationship?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's this kind of secondary trauma that occurs as you discover exactly what happened. And so, there's details about an affair that excuse me, that I would encourage the betrayed partner not to ask about, right? Um,
Which would be,
which would be like, not to get too graphic here, but like, you don't want to ask your partner that's had an affair, like, what sexual positions you used when you were cheating on me, like those
mhm,
kinds of things. That's going to create some unnecessary trauma on the betrayed partner's part, but it's also
mhm.
going to really cast a really difficult shadow over the healing process. So, questions that I think are appropriate are, questions of, how often were you getting together? What sort of things did you do to keep this a secret? Definitely who, this was with. What were the circumstances that allowed you to, keep things secret? Questions about feelings towards that partner. I think those are all really important questions to ask. So I try to focus more on, here's the questions I think you could ask if you wanted to, rather than um, kind of what's off limits. Usually people arrive at a place where they feel like they've heard enough. And that's kind of where we want them to be. Like, have you heard enough to feel like you can move forward in this relationship? Or have you heard enough for you to just decide, I just can't. Sometimes that's what happens.
So in infidelity, you know how social media, text messaging, all that stuff, right? I see the asking of the questions that you just mentioned, like how often, how did you keep it a secret? Like
Mhm.
it helps create like a path for how to move forward. It sounds like, okay, well, these are your temptations and these are the ways that you were cheating, or infidelity or betrayal. Then how do we avoid that? And some spouses feel the need to monitor that person's
Yeah.
cell phone usage and all that stuff. And so, can you talk a little bit about pros and cons to that,
Well,
or
I
if there
I
are any
think,
pros?
yeah, I'm not a huge fan of monitoring, just because I don't think that it contributes to trust in the relationship the way that couples really want. I think transparency is super important. I think couples need to be open. There needs to not be any secrets. Um, a lot of times, the reason that an affair is discovered is because um, there's, one spouse has been, snooping in the other's phone or something like that. And so understandably, there's some concern that leads to that type of, you know, checking in on the device. But to me, that's an indication that there's some fractures in the relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to have the types of relationships where we can say, hey, here's what I'm noticing, and it's raising some flags for me. I'd really like to know what's going on that's giving me this vibe, right? Without me having to go behind your back, because that's a deception as well. And so it
Mm-hmm.
contributes to the lack of trust in the relationship, on the betrayed partner, right?
Yeah.
So, in the recovery state, I think it's important to be transparent, right? Leaving your phone on the counter, unlocked, or with your partner knowing the passcode to get in, right? That communicates, I trust you, like it's an open book. But I think that there needs to be some agreements there about what it's going to look like, and not this kind of clandestine, I'm on a private detective mission to
Mm-hmm.
hear everything.
Oh, I have people who are like, give me your phone. I want to take a look at your phone.
Sure. Sure, and that's I would call that a trauma response, right? They're afraid of what they're going to find, but that's doing something to the relationship to discover that in that way. That's doing something negative to the relationship.
I mean, that's a hard place to be, right? Like you're trying to build trust with someone who just broke your trust in a monumental way.
Right. Yeah, most of the time, couples who are just so bent on, discovering, like digging into their phone, what they're looking for is what we call it a gotcha moment, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
they find something and it's like, gotcha. But what does that really do for the relationship to have that moment where I caught you, right? It doesn't do anything healthy for the relationship. So trust is not established by arriving at this gotcha moment.
Mm-hmm.
uh, Trust is established by having open communication and discussing, where are we at, and fostering the type of relationship that both partners want to be in, rather than the type of relationship that they feel the need to turn away from.
Mm. Yeah. And I think of, because you said betrayal is more than just like, sexual betrayal. Um, because I've had clients and people, right, that have had betrayal beyond the sexual. It's like financial.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, just like one of the ones that comes to mind is just like financial, right? Like a person hiding the financials, getting the family, like losing a lot of money for
Mhm.
whatever means, through gambling or through just, poor choices. Um, and that betrayal feels to them a lot like someone who has cheated on them,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't get hung up on definitions of cheating, because even from couple to couple, it varies what's included there, right?
Yeah.
And so it really has more to do with betrayal. Like, if one partner feels betrayed, even if it's over something that for another couple would be relatively insignificant, that matters, because, in healthy relationships, we don't want our partner to feel betrayed, even if it's about something as simple as, messaging a friend in a completely innocent and, platonic way. If my partner feels betrayed by that, there's some mending of the relationship that needs to happen, and some agreements that needs to be made, or some trauma that needs to be dealt with. That creates that feeling of betrayal.
Often people who are in that situation, or if they have like an emotional affair, they're like, but I didn't cheat on you. So I like that you said it's not about the definition. If one person feels betrayed, instead of saying you betrayed me, I feel betrayed.
Right.
Like this is a problem because I feel betrayed.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a much more, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? It kind of broadens the definition a little bit,
Mhm.
rather than thinking how close to the line of not cheating, can I get? and still get away with this. We're looking more at the health of the relationship as the determinant of whether or not I should be doing this, right?
Yeah. I feel like if you bring in the word cheating, it can be really like it can create that person's it'll kick in the defense mode, right? I didn't
Absolutely.
cheat. This no, it's not cheating, or maybe it is cheating, right? But when you say it like I feel betrayed, it almost makes you step out of your action and to some extent, right? Like the blame of your action
Right.
and look at empathizing with what that person might be feeling. Like
Absolutely.
they feel betrayed. Okay. I did something that they feel betrayed by. So I
Right.
don't know. I don't know
Yeah.
if that would make sense or not, but
Yeah. No, I think that makes perfect sense. I did something that made them feel betrayed. That doesn't necessarily mean that I betrayed my partner, right?
mhm.
This kind of goes back to the you triggered me, you know,
Yeah.
because I might feel betrayed by something that was completely innocent, by my partner. They didn't know that this was going to be something that betrayed me, that would betray me. But because of, what I'm dealing with internally, or my previous relationship history, or something that doesn't even have to do with them, those actions created this feeling of betrayal. And it's in their best interest to know about that, so that they can be sensitive, to these things, or so that they can know this is what I'm trying to work through, right? I know you didn't intend to betray me, but you need to know this is how I was affected by that. And I'm working
Yeah.
through that so that you don't feel like I'm being betrayed by you all the time, but so that you can also attune to my needs, and we can have a caring partnership where we both believe the other person wants what's best for us.
So let's dive a little bit into attune because you just said it
Okay.
again.
Yeah, it's a big word in Gottman.
A big word, attune. So, talk a little bit about attunement and how that shows up in, you said it was the second state or the second phase, right? Atone, attune, attach. So, how does attune look like? Attunement.
If I had to summarize it, I would say attunement has to do with empathetic curiosity. If I had to summarize it with two words, when I'm being curious with empathy, what I'm really doing is kind of putting myself in a position of learning and seeking understanding of my partner without any judgment, without making an assessment or evaluations. The sole purpose is to communicate. I'm for you, and I want to know you. I want to understand, what's going on within you.
Mhm.
And I'm going to sit here, to use that cliche term, holding space for you, right? To share whatever you feel like I need to know. That's what attunement is. It has to do with emotions, right? Um,
Mhm.
Not owning the other person's emotions, but wanting to know not just what happened, but how is this making you feel? Yeah.
What about, so that's for the partner that feels betrayed. What about attunement for the accused?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it goes both ways, right? And that's really difficult, I think, sometimes, because what I've experienced is the betraying partner, it is usually the first one who's ready to move past things, right? They just want to get over it.
Mhm.
And so part of their attunement is leaning into the pain that their partner's feeling over being betrayed, right? Asking those questions, help me understand how this has impacted you. I want to know about the pain that I've caused you. Tell me
Mm,
about it.
that's a humbling experience.
No joke. It really is, right? And it doesn't take a serious betrayal to know that,
Mhm.
but it does require some resiliency, to be able to say, okay, this is part of the effect of my choices, and I need to sit with how this has impacted this person that I care about, and hear all of the difficult emotions that they feel, and to communicate, I get it. I get why you feel this way. It makes sense, and I know I've got a part in that.
I feel like that is probably one of the harder steps for most people because that is a lot of I mean that is humbling and people are telling you this the things that you've done have caused this pain and like you said holding space for that can be really hard because you want to immediately jump into like, well, I didn't mean to, and this is why I did it, or whatever, right? Like that
We're fixing,
defensiveness kicks in. Yeah.
yeah, we're trying to fix it. Like, what do we need to do? How do we solve this? And this is how we solve it, is by allowing it to do what it needs to do, which is those feelings, they need to breathe, right? They need to have their moment. It's whoever's sharing about their feelings, it's their turn to let those feelings do what they do, and they're there for a reason, right? That's the appropriate thing to feel.
And if having that type of conversation proves to be unproductive, that was the word I was looking for this whole entire
Yeah.
time. A
Unproductive.
productive conversation, right? Like productive. I couldn't remember it at the beginning, but it's there. So when those conversations are no longer productive, that's when they come in and find someone like you, right? Like,
Right.
so I'd love for you to share a little bit about how people can get a hold of you and your services.
Yeah. So probably the easiest way is to go to my website, www.joshkellarcounseling.com. And my name is spelled Kellar, just so you don't misspell it and get redirected to somebody else's counseling site. So yeah, joshkellarcounseling.com. I'm a therapist in Temple, Texas. And so that's the one you're looking for. And yeah.
And on your website, you mentioned you have a freebie that people can
Sure.
have access to. So
yeah, it's called the Couple Connection Checkup. I kind of adapted it from another tool that I found kind of along the way, but it's basically just a guided conversation that you and your partner can have that helps you kind of get a state of the union, like where are we at? There's some specific questions that you ask one another, taking turns and using the.
oh, hold on. And use it, it blanked you out for a second. So
Sorry.
you ask one another and it uses what?
It uses some specific questions to kind of get a state of the union. You're following that speaker listener pattern to make sure that you're understanding what your partner's saying and they're understanding you. And by the end of the four questions, you've got a really good sense of where the relationship is at and what needs to happen moving forward to build better connection.
Do you do any virtual appointments?
I don't typically do virtual. In a special circumstance, I do offer weekend marathon intensives where it's
Ooh.
like a week to week session. If a couple just didn't have the time to do that because of their jobs, I do virtual marathon intensives where we do like half day or full day or multiple day, kind of cram it all into one weekend type thing. So that's really the only thing that I do virtually.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Josh. I've really loved this conversation. I feel like I've learned a ton. So I really appreciate you joining me today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, if anyone has any other additional questions, I'm sure you can reach out to Josh directly through his website. And you don't have to be in Texas to get access to his freebie on his website. So, and for all of you listening today, I just really appreciate it. And if you have any questions for me, you can always reach out to me. And you guys have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.